Hey everyone, and welcome to the 67th edition DF Direct Weekly. It is indeed our weekly show where we talk about the latest gaming and technology news, hence the name. Joining me to discuss this week's lineup of topics, first of all, John Linneman.
Rich, how you doing? Ready to talk?
Ready to talk. And of course, Alex Battaglia.
Hey, Rich, John, I'm ripping and rearing to talk about this week's topics. I'm
Ripping
very
and
excited.
rearing.
Yes, I don't know what that means necessarily, but I'm doing it. It's alliteration.
That's a strong statement of intent, so let's get straight to it. First news topic this week, PlayStation Plus. The rollout is now complete. We took a look at the service when it was operating in its debut in Asia, since rolled out to Japan, the US. Now it is in the UK and Europe. And, well, as we know, 3 tiers, the essential tier, which is essentially what PlayStation Plus has always been, an extra tier, which offers a big bunch of extra games. And the volume of titles there is quite astonishing. But the point of contention has always been the premium tier and its offerings of classic games. And John, what's the story there? I think everything has pretty much proceeded as we have foreseen, to quote Palpatine.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, how do you think their essential compares to the Eurogamer essential?
Oh boy.
Well, Eurogamer Essential is sort of the best of the best, and their Essential is like the bare minimum.
Yeah, exactly.
What you already had.
So, yeah, they launched the service in Europe, and guess what? PAL versions. Zero surprise. But then there was a twist to the story. They basically came out and officially announced that they are planning to implement the NTSC versions into regions that had PAL versions on the service. And honestly, what can I say? I mean, that's exactly what we wanted to hear about the service, right? Like, that's fantastic news. Like, obviously, I think launching them as PAL versions in the first place wasn't a great thing, but you know, that bridge has already been crossed, and the fact that they're essentially owning up to it and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do moving forward, that's fantastic news. I don't think there's a timetable yet on that, but you know, it doesn't solve every issue with the emulation that we pointed out, and we still don't know what this means for things like PS2 games, I guess. But this is a good thing.
Yeah, it is. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that's pretty much what we asked for when we saw that this issue was going to be raising its ugly head once again, which is essentially just, if you want to offer these multi-language versions that are only available in the PAL territory, fine, but also offer the NTSC alternatives as well. So you've got a choice of actually having the game as the developer intended, which is somewhat crucial to the experience. And it's obviously welcome news. I guess the cynic in me is still saying, how come this happened in the first place? Because it's nothing new, right? When the PlayStation 2 classics on PS4 rolled out, it was the same complaint, and there was possibly not the same level of response to it at the time, but there was, I wouldn't say outrage, but certainly a critique of the offering back then, and basically not much was done about it. And then the same mistake made again years later, and only now are we actually seeing a commitment to actually get those versions out there. So, I mean, it's good news, but it's reactive. They weren't, they didn't take a proactive stance on sorting that out.
Rich, I'll be honest, I actually think that with these issues more and more, there is just this level of misunderstanding, not fully grasping why things are what they are. It seems like this seems obvious to us, right? But over and over, we're seeing releases like this. We're seeing retro collections of stuff where developers just make these strange choices or clearly don't understand why things are the way they are. And that sounds silly to say it, but it just keeps happening. And like for instance, I don't want to get into this one, of course, but I'm doing a video on Sonic Origins. Lots of weirdness with it, but at its most basic level, the screen is filtered using bilinear filtering. It's blurry. The pixel art is not preserved properly. This was solved in Sonic Mania. This was never a problem. Why is this a problem here? Like, why do you release things like that? It's in the same book is this. It seems obvious to us, and you'd think it would be obvious to the people doing the work, but they keep making these errors. And I do think it's the same stuff with this PAL thing, where they're just like, whoever's managing the project thinks, oh, well, we'll just match the regions. That sounds logical, right? And I suspect there's a lot of people that don't even understand why the PAL versions are problematic in this case, right? Like, it's that has to be that. Like, why else does this keep happening?
Yeah, it is almost like the platform holders are operating in a kind of alternate timeline where 50 hertz was actually a good thing. I just don't quite understand how why it's happening. Simply because it's nothing new. We knew at the time that it wasn't great. Anybody who compared them.
The issue, though, is that 50 hertz itself isn't inherently bad. The big problem, and these aren't great conversions necessarily.
Well,
but
it
the
is
big
when the
problem,
games are built at 60 hertz.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
They're not. It doesn't have to be inherently bad, right? You can have good PAL conversions. Not that that's what we have here. The problem is even a good PAL conversion isn't going to work if you're displaying a 50 hertz thing within a 60 hertz container. That's the problem in a nutshell, right there. So they kind of ruin the fluidity of the games as a result.
I'm also just a bit confused why, well, not confused, I'm just wondering why there isn't an extra step gone to make a multi-language version of games appear in NTSC 60 hertz versions, because there's a lot of games on PC that are not released, for example, with certain language support, and you can go online and find language patches made by users. You can find whole audio files dragged and dropped in to make things like Russian or German when they weren't before. And those are just community done things. And if they're really interested in getting language support, why not go the extra little bit there?
That would be cool, but that stuff typically doesn't work out very well when companies get involved with the community. But I think the big issue is that while I was thinking, oh, this is language related, when you actually look at these PAL games that they released, most of them are actually still English only.
Oh my God.
So they don't even have multi-language support.
What's the point?
Well, yeah, I still think, and I'm going to say it again, the retro community, individuals in some cases are pulling together packages that are way better than what the platform holders are doing, and something has got to change there. It's just remarkable, the gulf there in quality. But yeah, I just want to stress that this is the premium tier we're talking about, and the classic games in the premium tier. But there is actually the extra tier as well, and this is essentially a deluge of PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 games. I mean, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Control Ultimate Edition, Death Stranding. Holy crap, there's so much here. Demon Souls remake. I mean, if you're just getting into PlayStation 5, for example, Guardians of the Galaxy is on there. Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. This subscription is actually looking really good. Returnal is there. So yeah, there's a ton of great stuff on that sort of extra tier, which offers you a bunch of games. PlayStation 4 version has, well, if you've got a PlayStation 4, there's still value there. I mean, the list of games there is even more ginormous. I'm seeing here that Bubsy, the Woolly Strike Pack, is on there, which means day one for Audi, obviously. And Crisis Remastered. I mean, there's huge amount of value in those lower tiers. It's always been the premium one, which kind of makes it even worse, right? Because they're charging a premium for something that isn't quite right. I don't know, but it's there, it's out there. Extra tier certainly looks great from my perspective. The right noises are being made for premium, and fingers crossed we'll see some progress there, not just in terms of the release of 60 hertz titles, but also in actually improving the emulator. And if you've not seen John's critique on that, please do check it out. Okay, second news story. This week, Nintendo emerged from hiding with a new Nintendo Direct, which was a huge reveal. 24 minutes worth of footage of the new Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Now, this series has always been kind of like at the cutting edge of technology when it comes to Nintendo platforms, which are typically not defined by their power envelopes, so to speak. John, you're going to be taking a look at this for us. when it comes to doing the full tech review. But based on this 24-minute reveal, what are your first thoughts? I mean, I thought it looked really, really impressive. And actually, I was beginning to question whether it was actually running on the Switch. But wow, it looks really good, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear by now that Monolith Soft is one of the best developers on the Switch in terms of pushing technology. Like, they're out here delivering these gigantic scale open world RPGs with just like a ton happening in terms of like cinematics and animation work and just scale. And I love some of their techniques, their motion blur technique they use during the cutscenes. You see that a lot in this direct. But, you know, I guess this is it made me think about what's happening with the Switch lately, where I feel like more and more we're seeing new releases come out for this thing, and they're just failing to hit the mark. You know what I mean? Like, poor image quality, bad frame rates, just issues that it feels like it's getting worse. And I suspect that comes down to just this, the amount of work required to get good performance out of the Switch is probably more significant, and we're not seeing it as often. So I feel like this is a breath of fresh air, because not only does it look great, it looks like they've actually addressed a lot of the issues that we saw in the second game, which was their first Switch project. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was notorious for not so great image quality, shall we say, especially in the portable mode. Though I don't know if we've seen any portable footage in this specifically, but their solution to anti-aliasing and clarity of the image was not great. And the games were very fuzzy and low res. They used like a very aggressive dynamic resolution scaling system. And although the game was beautiful, it was let down by that. So based on what we're seeing in this direct, provided it is all, legit footage from the hardware, it looks to be a gigantic improvement in that regard. They've really improved things.
So, John, the question is Xenoblade Chronicles 3 too big for Switch?
Yeah.
I would say no.
Too big.
Clearly not. I mean, I don't know how familiar you guys are with these games.
I'm familiar with the Wii game or whatever.
I just love the idea of like worlds built on top of like giant mecha that are fighting, and you're like basically like microscopic beings living on these gigantic fighting galactic creatures. It's just it's wild, the scope that they go for, and it's cool to see. And yeah, this looks to be their most impressive yet, and I suspect this will be their last regular Switch project. I would think. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I can't imagine that whatever they do next is still going to be another big game for the original Switch, right?
It does strain credibility simply because we're approaching the 6th birthday of the original Switch, and obviously the Super Switch is lurking in the wings somewhere, and it would make sense for them to be moving on to the next one, right?
But of course, I mean, these guys seemingly have assisted with a lot of Switch stuff over the years. I think they were involved with Breath of the Wild to some degree. They've helped out with other projects. They seem to be sort of one of Nintendo's key studios in terms of just pushing cutting edge technology on the platform for the hardware target.
This trailer, I mean, I watched a good portion of it before we came on air here, and the detail level just looked really, really impressive. They've really pushed the Switch here, and I can't wait to see more. I guess from my perspective, I think you raised it earlier, John, the question is about the portable side of things, because they just about made it work as a docked experience with their prior title, but it kind of went to pot a bit in the portable.
That's a good way to put it, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it was perfectly serviceable, right? But it just didn't look right, really.
Yeah, it was just like, I think like the image quality was one of the biggest concerns there. Like John was talking about
it was the classic painterly aesthetic.
Yeah. What do you think, Alex? I'm curious. Based on this trailer, it almost looks to me like they're doing some sort of temporal upsampling techniques this time.
It has to be. I mean, unfortunately, the trailer is released at 1080p, and you're limited to everything out there at 1080p is just so compressed these days. So that's why I was watching it, and I was just thinking like, oh, am I actually seeing motion blur in gameplay here? Because that wasn't in the other game, right? But it's hard to tell if it's motion blur in gameplay or if it's just tons of compression. That's one thing I was thinking about. But yeah, like there's a number of shots where the camera's sitting still, And, John's talking about like this like large world they have going on there with the mecha backdrops, essentially, that the terrain. And this surprisingly pixel perfect look to that. I'm assuming we're looking at dock play here. It did look pretty 1080p-esque from those moments. So I'd imagine that's what they're doing, because if they're increasing fidelity here, the chances are that it is probably not native 1080p always, even in dock play. The one thing I'm actually kind of curious about is whether performance will hold up, because, I think a lot of open world games on Switch, they definitely do have a more variable frame rate at times. And I'm just curious about, because this game has a lot of you fight singular monsters in a field with a number of companions and things like that, and the particle effects can ramp up pretty heavily there, and the effects work. And I'm just curious if performance will hold in those moments as well too, or if they maybe have a really good dynamic res system, kind of like they had before. So I'm just curious about those things. I've only actually played the original game emulated to a bit. I've never actually played this one. I kind of did. I don't know if people in the audience agree with me with this, but I feel like they changed art styles between that first and and I felt like I don't know. There's some disconnect between the character rendering type and the world rendering type. The characters feel much more cartoony than the world they inhabit, and I don't think that was a thing in the original game. Maybe just because it was technologically limited or something like that.
I feel like the original game was pretty weak in terms of character models, to be honest. Targeting open world on the Wii, because if you go back and look at their prior games, like the Xeno games on PlayStation 2, those actually look significantly better in terms of character rendering, but they're not open world, right? So I think that was kind of the difference there. And they went for very low polygon characters on Wii with a lot of painterly textures, and obviously with this different art style they wanted to go for an anime-ish look, but the character geometry is much higher.
Yeah, that's actually very true. So, I mean, I'll be excited to see what John says about this when it does come out. When is it releasing, actually?
Is it July or August?
Oh, wow. So it's really, really close.
I think it's pretty soon.
Okay, yeah, it says 29th of July here. Okay, wow.
Yeah, so in July.
So we're going to be doing a deep dive on that one, I suspect, John. You're going to be handling that, I believe.
Yeah, looking forward to doing it, and it'll be something I one of the last things I do before I'm gone for some weeks. So
this one is actually really interesting. Forza Horizon 5 received a new update this week, and on the PC side, they have actually added a new anti-aliasing option, temporal AA, and this was actually something which we asked for in our PC tech review of Forza Horizon 5, and Alex, you were the asker as such. So you must be pretty happy about this. Have you taken a look at it?
I have taken a look at it. I don't have the footage as of yet, but I'm going to be making it right afterwards. But I did basically the basic already just for myself without recording, loading up the game with MSA, loading up the game with TAA. A bit annoying to do that because some of the options in Forza Horizon require you to leave the game. So it is a little bit annoying once again to change the options. But when you do look at it, I tried it out at 4K. I may also make a recording for this at 1080p just to show off the differences in that. Most people say that TA doesn't work as well as at lower resolutions, but oddly enough, in their post describing TAA, they thought it worked better at lower resolutions. I'm not sure why they said that. In my opinion, this is something that the game really, really required, and most modern games really require. Regardless of the fast speeds that you can go at in Forza Horizon, which are very, very fast, that technically means TAA is not going to be as effective or could artifact more. But it's worth it to take that hit in slight artifacting occasionally, I think, to actually have a very stable image. And that's something that the original Forza Horizon 5 and even 4 and 3 before that really didn't have. MSAA is pretty good in its default form for certain things, but these are new games. They're using PBR. There's a lot of specular surfaces. There's trees, bushes, vegetation everywhere that is not being treated with their form of MSAA. And so you would go through a jungle, or just really anything that wasn't just straight geometry would be pretty aliased, I always felt, in these games, even at 4K. So I am actually very happy with what I saw already. I'm going to be sending over some video to Audie here so it can show a little bit of what I'm talking about on screen. And I think it's a little bit sad that it's only out for PC right now. I think also maybe Xbox could benefit from this quite well. Like that 60 FPS mode could perhaps benefit from it quite well. Maybe even as an option in their 30 FPS mode there. I think it would look really good there. I'm just actually curious about what this means like for the future. Because if they listened to community there, asking for TAA, will they also listen to the community in regards to, a lot of people have wanted DLSS in this game ever since it launched too. They now technically have the hook-ins for that with TAA being in the game. Or, bringing it out into the future. What does this mean for Forza Motorsport? And what does this mean for future Forza Horizon games? Will they instead maybe focus on using TAA? I would actually kind of prefer that. And I think a lot of other developers making car games these days, racing games, sim games, a lot of them have TAA now and don't always have MSAA. Or if they do, it's kind of expensive. Here, it's actually not too expensive, as I talked about in my review. I actually do prefer the resolve of TAA these days in games. So I hope maybe this bodes well for the future for the Forza franchise on all platforms, not just on PC. I actually would like to see this as an option on console as well.
Well, you took a look at that Forza Motorsport trailer, which is the next game. Was there any conclusions to draw on anti-aliasing there? I mean, historically, they have stuck to MSAA simply because they want those pristine lines on the cars.
You're getting really pristine lines, though, with TA, though. That's the thing, It is pretty pristine. And that trailer, that Forza Motorsport trailer, it was really hard to be conclusive about that because it's so early and it was not really clear what we were looking at initially. But, there was some weird signs in there that anti-aliasing is maybe different this time around. And I would really prefer if they had a good TAA there in Forza Motorsport. But at the same time, it didn't look like whatever we saw in that Forza Motorsport trailer did not look like the resolve that we're seeing here, I would say, with Forza Horizon. So, I mean, they are two different teams. They share tech maybe only to a certain degree. So hard to say.
I would love them to bring this to the Xbox as well. I don't see why they couldn't do that. That would be a nice option to add in. At least on the Series X and S, perhaps.
I guess it would perhaps throw a spanner in the works in terms of their frame budgeting, which is like quite meticulously done. I guess it would depend on what the cost of the TAA is.
They have DRS in there, right? And so I feel like, I don't know, I'd be curious to see what they could do, because we don't know you're right, we don't know the actual cost of the TAA, but it seems reasonable enough, like I'd imagine.
It seems actually surprisingly similar to 4 times MSAA. I did the bench, and it seemed very similar. I mean, their MSAA was already pretty cheap based upon what their rendering was doing, but it also was missing so many lines, like so many edges and so much aliasing, that I feel like the trade-off there is worth it, even if it is a similar performance cost.
I think it would make the performance mode on Xbox look significantly better, because when the resolution does drop a little bit, it's more noticeable when you're just using MSAA, right? TAA would really smooth that out. It should look really great.
And to be clear, it replaces MSAA completely, right?
That's what I'm pretty sure it does, yes. Which is, I mean, it would be kind of nice to have them both on at the same time.
Mix and match, yeah.
Mix and match. I mean, a lot of games have done that in the past. One thing that I actually hope, I mean, we're just talking about future stuff here, but I really don't think they need to be targeting native resolution. And I hope this is a move in that direction of not targeting native. I'm talking about consoles here, not on PC. PC's just target what you want. But on console, I feel like they could improve the visuals in certain directions even more if they were okay with 1440p-esque internal image quality. And then maybe upsampling that. I feel like that would be the way to take the series forward even further than it is now.
So, last minute addition here. John literally held up recording in order to add this one to the docket. Um, Essentially, he just said that there's a Klonoa demo out that's got issues and he's not happy about it. I know nothing about it beyond
I
that.
don't
So,
know
John, you're
either.
going to have to clue us in here.
Klonoa is being re-released. The first two games they're being recreated for modern platforms. It's the Fantasy Reverie collection, I think, or series, and I'm very happy about that. But they put out a demo this week. It's actually fine on the other main platforms, but the Switch version is specifically the one I'm
Wow,
absolutely baffled by it.
that
So
was that was a big sigh.
it was because I love these games, and this is the best chance we have at seeing more Klonoa, and I feel like they're potentially hurting the situation by releasing what seems to be a subpar Switch version. So it does seem to have been developed, I think, by the company that did the Katamari re-roll, which was not bad. They're taking a similar approach here though, where it is built in Unity, and they're doing a lot of new assets and changes to it. And the changes are whatever. I don't like all of them. Like they removed the cell shading from Klonoa 2. They changed some of like the water and effects and such in a way that looks a little bit less what I love, but it's still nice looking. That's not the problem. But on Switch, it doesn't run a proper 60 frames per second. And I actually think that releasing that in that condition is actually insulting to the original PlayStation game and the developers. And I say that because we know that targeting or delivering a 60 FPS 3D platform game on the PlayStation 1 was a very tall order. It's something not many games or developers were ever able to achieve. Few attempted it. Namco did it with Klonoa, and it was a defining feature of it. It was very smooth performance, super quick loading. It felt amazing and responsive. To go all these years later and bring it back and to deliver something that can't match the PlayStation original in terms of performance, no matter what the visuals are, the fact that it falls short, it runs worse than PlayStation. The loading times between rooms and areas are about 2 to 3 times longer than PS1, running off of an optical
What?
disc.
Optical
Uh,
disc? Oh my god.
and they're
That's
very
bad.
short on PlayStation, by the way.
Eh.
That game was so beautifully optimized on the PlayStation 1, a work of art. So to come to this, and it applies to Klonoa 2 as well, which on PlayStation 2, of course, perfect 60 FPS, as you'd expect. And it just doesn't run right. And I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but I don't think that's acceptable. And I think that they've made some errors along the way here that I don't know anything about their development process, but from what I've learned talking to developers, especially building like large like Unity or Unreal projects on the Switch, if you want 60 FPS on the Switch has to be the primary target, right?
Right. That's
This
the situation with like Ukulele and the Impossible Layer.
That's right. When they built that game, they targeted Switch first and foremost. And that game, by the way, is very visually comparable to a Klonoa kind of thing in terms of complexity, I'd say. And yeah, they're like, okay, Switch is the target. We get 60 on Switch. We have to be maintaining 60 on Switch. The other versions then are they're gravy, basically. And that's exactly what happened. And clearly here, this feels like a project that wasn't keeping that platform in mind necessarily. Uh, and they've just hit a point where they can't get the performance they need. And yeah, it's kind of a mess. You can at least disable the tutorials, by the way, which that was something that absolutely drove me up the wall in the videos, how everything now has these tutorial windows that pop up, and the first level is just packed with like the action freezes, big box pops up and says, here's how you do this action. Which again, the original games were designed in such a way that you should learn that organically. You don't need to be told what to do, I think. This to me reeks of like, okay, well, focus groups say that some people aren't able to figure stuff out. And I don't like that approach, but at least you can turn them off. Um so yeah, I just wanted to get that out there just because it was kind of bothering me on that front. But again, it looks like the other versions, from what I tested at least, are perfectly fine. They look good, even with the changes. They look great. They play great. I think it's going to be awesome on there. It's just Switch should be better.
Right. And Switch is kind of like the platform. which is, you'd think, the sort of ideal home for these kind of
Exactly. That's the
platformers.
thing. And it's just, it's a real bummer because you can tell a lot of work was poured into this otherwise. And it's just, I'm puzzled by this. And again, though, this is a pre-release demo. So I guess it's worth keeping that in mind. It's not like it's running at 30 frames per second. It's more like bouncing between 50 and 60 all the time, right? But just that instability doesn't feel very pleasant.
I guess we're going to have to reserve judgment for final code, right?
Yeah.
But it is a bit telling if this one is slightly dodgy and the others are absolutely fine. I guess that's the sort of key concern there, isn't it? So this one came out of nowhere, and it's actually quite cute and quite fascinating. Obviously, the PlayStation 5, as you can see right here, it is an absolutely ginormous unit. A remarkably large console. So it was with a lot of interest that we saw that the YouTube channel DIY Perks had essentially created its own PlayStation 5 Slim. Alex, do you want to pick up the story there?
Sure. Yeah, this one is basically ripping out the entire internals of the PlayStation 5 there, including the heatsink fan assembly, which Rich has looked at before. As well as Gamers Nexus and things like that. And I think the conclusions are that the size and the exact design of the PlayStation 5 is a bit form following function. It is big because it kind of needs to be big. It's it's like a big chip in there, and there's that big SSD controller and things like that. And the RAM too is also going to get hot. So it made sense that it was pretty big. So the question is, without a die shrink, which is the usual way you get a slim console, the size of the physical system on a chip there, that chip, it gets smaller. It starts being able to run cooler with less voltage and things like that. Without doing that, how do you actually make a slim console? And this is essentially where you're going the PC route. It is basically rebuilding a PC in a separate chassis. Unfortunately, the laws of thermodynamics have their limits, as the video shows off. It is really small, and it is actually what I would really prefer. I actually think the Series S is the perfect new console in terms of size, and it's actually the best looking one.
It's actually it's a console as you would actually recognize a console.
Yeah, that's I have that. Oh my God, the Series S and the PlayStation 5 are just dueling here for space. And it actually has that new size, and I think they actually did it rather artfully in terms of design and things like that. But the limitation there is it is water-cooled, and they have to break out the the power supply and the radiator and everything that you would associate with water cooling into a separate device, like a power brick, essentially on the side. And it's not small. It is not small. There obviously you could probably get smaller reservoirs, but then you'd be worrying about heat because this is really hot. So I think in the end it's actually really cool, and it just shows, even though we're not happy with the PlayStation 5's visual design, it may actually be right at the limits of thermals and power and what they can reasonably do. And then the waves on it are just aesthetics at that point. So I think I bet I can't actually wait for the slim version of the PlayStation 5 because if it looks anything like this one, we're in for something really cool there.
That's the kind of issue, right? Because the console is slim, but then tucked away behind the desk is this gigantic cooling solution and power supply. I'm surprised you didn't put in the Xbox One second GPU into there as well. and I've got to take my hat off to to DIY Perks for the construction of it, where he used $300 worth of copper for the heat plates, which is the cost of the console.
So much. It's a bit wasteful.
Not feasible.
For that console. Yeah, not at all.
I just think I think on the flip side, it actually serves to highlight the challenges in cooling the PlayStation 5. To better it and to do it in a slim design, this extreme solution is required to get the job done. And the temperature improvements seem to be significant based on this water cooling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, as with water cooling, you'd hope it is. I mean, I think you could probably design a slim using less, extreme measures that would be more in line with the original thermals.
Right.
and then it
Yes.
maybe wouldn't have this semi-awkward situation with all the the radiator and the power supply on the side. Maybe you could do
They
that.
can definitely make once the die shrink is here, once they've got a smaller process for the SoC, then they can make a more traditional slim style console. But I still think it will be probably on the larger side compared to prior slim consoles. But you quite like this as a kind of artistic statement, really, didn't you, John?
Yeah, I thought it's a neat looking box. It's very, very minimalist, but I actually like the design and the choice he did there. But it really demonstrates how volatile and, tricky the cooling can be, because in the video, the first attempt at it, his giant power supply water cooling brick thing fell and it blocked one of the intakes, I think. And
And the
it caused
board died.
it caused it to overheat and kill the motherboard, basically.
This is so brutal.
So he had to swap in another PS5 board. And I'm just like, again, it just shows like how riding that line, and this would be a tough consumer product to release, right? Like if somebody was thinking like, yeah, let's do a console where, because I actually thought about that at first. It's like, you look at like the PS2 Slim or something, right? Super tiny little machine, and then the power brick is an external brick, or even Xbox One, whatever. But it's like, what if you did a water cooling power supply, where you have these big chunky cables running to the console, and you got the cooling and the power all in this one unit, but then you have to worry about cooling that thing, and who wants to put that behind your TV, right? So there's potential danger there as well. But I love the form and design. It looked very industrial.
I actually think that they could have made a smaller PlayStation 5, but it would have been excessively noisy. It's quiet. I mean, that's the triumph of both of the higher end consoles this generation, is that you don't notice them in the way that you did with the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 4 Pro specifically, where they didn't really seem to be conducive to a nice living room environment. Those fans were just like kind of crazy. So, it's kind of a gigantic solution that they came to arrive on to in order to get a quiet console out there.
There
But
was
there it
one
is.
caveat though, is like he had to do it with the digital unit,
Yeah, that's
so
the
no
Right.
optical drive, and that would have obviously massively increased the
size.
size.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that was a really interesting project. And if you've not seen the video, I do highly recommend checking it out. And with that, let's move on to our final news topic of the week. A bit sad, this one, because a prospective follow-up to what John said is actually one of the greatest games of the last generation is not happening. It was canned. John, do you want to clue us in on this one?
Vicarious Visions did the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake, and it was the best thing in the Tony Hawk series for more than a decade. The series had kind of disappeared for a while, but the last entries and some of the stuff they were doing weren't great. But this was a true return to form, sort of revitalizing the franchise. And as far as I understood it, it was very successful numbers-wise. Yeah, it was like possibly the most successful game in series history at release in terms of sales. But I fear these days there's a real problem with the way these large companies operate, where a success is not enough, right? There's a difference between success and mega success, making billions. And they want the billions. They want the huge numbers. They want these gigantic, like earth-shattering successes. This little moderate to still very successful project seems like it didn't make Activision happy enough, because Vicarious Visions was working on, as we've learned, Tony Hawk 3 and 4 remastered, sort of, or whatever you want to call it, basically doing the same sort of work on those games that they did for 1 and 2. And 3 and 4 are also phenomenal games. 3 is widely considered to be the best in the series, in fact. And that got scrapped because of the Vicarious Visions merger situation. I guess they merged with Blizzard, right?
Yeah, Blizzard Act division.
They were folded into Blizzard, and they kind of became another support studio, if you will, which this is one of the problems I think I've had with Activision for a while, is like they reward companies building successful games by immediately throwing them to either the Call of Duty salt mines or the Blizzard dungeon, and then they're just stuck there, and then it kills their identity. The creative people of those companies likely would like to move on at that point, and it's just another great developer just dead, thrown into the situation is what it feels like. And it's a serious bummer. And I don't know what this holds with the Microsoft merger, and it's probably all just wishful thinking, but this is the kind of situation I would like to see improved, with them being taken over by Microsoft, essentially, where potentially they could allow like games like this to continue and be made, and not throw all of these developers into these support studio roles.
I mean, there has been some noises from Phil Spencer that he's looking to resurrect some of the older franchises that Activision have, but these companies are like gigantic corporate juggernauts where affecting actual change isn't something that you just do with a click of the fingers. It takes years to reposition resources. So yes, I mean, I'd hope to see that those older games do get a bit of love, and that they're perfect for Games Pass, right?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that is a bit disappointing that we wouldn't get to see more of Tony Hawk, especially since well, apparently you're saying it was quite successful, Joel. Which
yeah, that's what I've read.
Wow,
it was a success, and they did awesome next gen versions too. Like playing that game at 120 frames per second, it's sublime.
Before we go on to supporter Q&A, I think we want to talk about one or two of the projects that we are sort of working on at the moment. Let's start with DF Retro, John, because there's some interesting projects going on there, right?
Yeah, so there's some stuff coming up. Obviously, the next DF Retro will happen, and I'll announce that at some point. But I'm going to be away for a lot of July, so we'll see what happens there. But some of that will get worked on while I'm away, actually. But we do have two little things coming up soon. First of all, just for the patrons, we have the Retro Pickups, another one that Audie and I just shot this week with some cool stuff on there. But the big one is that yesterday we had the chance to do a full 2.5 hour filmed interview and discussion with the legendary Randy Linden. If you're not familiar with Randy's work, he's one of those genius programmers, like well-versed in the world of assembly language and also machine code, really, who built his career on doing the impossible, seemingly impossible. So like he built Dragon's Lair for the Amiga running from floppy disks, which was a Laserdisc game. He developed Doom for the Super NES. It was recently revealed that he had been working on a prototype of Quake for the Game Boy Advance, which is just wild. And Modern Vintage Gamer has a great video on that, by the way, so check that out. And then he also architected Bleem, which was the PlayStation emulator in development in the late 90s. And as we talk about on there, like the idea of emulating PlayStation seems quaint these days, but at that time, there wasn't documentation for this. There wasn't really examples of this happening. Any early attempts at PlayStation emulation during that era were so limited at the time. So this guy goes in, he basically just starts to reverse engineer the system. He gets a book on the MIPS R3000 CPU and just going through these unencrypted binaries on these disks and just figuring out like what are these things calling, or what are they doing on the hardware. And I can't even imagine just going through it that way at the time, right? Because just the lack of info and documentation on this, figuring all this out. He was a true trailblazer in that regard. And then, of course, he even managed to get Bleem on the Dreamcast before Sony kind of put the boot down, unfortunately. But it's such an interesting project that just really important to the legacy of like emulation, and it's cool stuff. And yeah, we go into all of that and more. And yeah, what a super nice guy. It's super knowledgeable as well. And he has a lot of cool examples too. Like he brought his homemade GBA dev kit, and he talked about his homemade development board that they did for figuring out how to bring Doom and over to the system, because they didn't actually have official Super FX development hardware or anything. So it was all hacked together from a Star Fox cart, and just wild stuff that they were doing. And I love it. It's great.
Well, this kind of reminds me of the GeForce 256 video you did, which is to say that there's a lot of stories in the industry which we kind of need the developers to come forward and talk about them, otherwise they'll be lost forever. And that was you and Audie doing that interview, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. I'm going to look forward to that. Speaking of Audie, he gave me a heads up on Slack that he's bought a super rare CDI power supply. And yeah, apparently, and unfortunately, it's being shipped to my house. So I suppose I'm going to have to look. I asked him if it's rare because nobody wants to power up the CDI. That seemed like the logical sort of conclusion there. But no, that interview sounds absolutely terrific. It went on for hours, didn't it, John?
Yeah. And I think in the end, the video will be around 2.5 hours. So, and there's still so much more we could have talked about, honestly. He's just a fountain of information. And it's great. It's great. Love it.
I think these stories, these really important stories from the annals of development. I mean, if there's people that want to talk to us about this stuff, I suspect the statute of limitations as applies to a lot of it because it's so far in the past now. But yeah, please do approach us and let's
Absolutely.
talk.
Just reach out anytime.
Okay, let's move on to our final segment of the show. This is the supporter Q&A. This is where backers of the DF supporter program come forward every week to pose questions that we select for inclusion on the show. And I'm going to kick off with this one from Techno Dan. With the mixed reaction to The Last of Us remake, do you think Naughty Dog could have given the game a better showing by showing gameplay comparisons instead of mostly cutscene comparisons? Since the cutscenes were originally pre-rendered, the difference isn't as noticeable as when comparing the actual real-time graphics. In addition, they could show the improved gameplay and accessibility features, the latter of which I feel could justify the remake for a lot of people. So it's a really good point, right, John? But I guess the first thing I would say is that when a game is sort of reaching the end of development, it's going to be on shelves soon, there's actually a marketing campaign with lots of different beats. And maybe all of the stuff that Techno Dan is discussing here is just a little further along down the road of the marketing plan. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. I feel like the one thing they could have done differently to really get the point across initially, though, is to clarify with people that what they were seeing on the PlayStation 3 side was a pre-rendered video, right? Because I don't think a lot of people actually are aware of that. We've talked about it before, but I think people just assume that's what the game looks like, but it's not. Those were greatly enhanced over what the PlayStation 3 actually renders in that game. And they actually run consistently, which was not the case on PS3 either. So I think if they had seen real-time PS5 versus pre-rendered on PS3, that makes it much more of an impact. And that's a point of clarification I think they could have made.
Yeah, I agree with John there. But also, I think we all here also like when a game is shown with gameplay. Like when you see it the first time, so you get a sense of what it is. Not I'm just really not into teasers, and I'm just not into cinematic showings because they can mean anything really. I think you can see that with the way people got all super hyped about Battlefield 2042 when they showed off I had no feelings there. We talked about it back then, this pre-rendered trailer with people doing crazy stuff and having animations. The game doesn't look like that, and then the game comes out and it's or the beta comes out and it's just oh, this is actually really bad. So I don't think you're just hype building then. And here was slight backfire because John was saying, the original PS3 version of the game, well, it didn't actually look like those original pre-rendered cinematics. So long story short, I think I would really prefer, Techno Dan is mentioned here, to show off a game the first time around with gameplay in there, for sure.
I guess the question is how enhanced the gameplay is and to what extent the features of The Last of Us Part 2 are actually going to be in The Last of Us Part 1. And there's a lot of sort of hints. Oliver's video was quite comprehensive about the stuff from The Last of Us Part 2 that seems to have been injected into that. And I do think they could make a lot more of the gameplay. Maybe that is to come in a forthcoming marketing push pre-release. But that's kind of what we want to see at this point, right? I guess from their perspective, it was little more than a tease, really, to sort of sort of lay the groundwork. This game is coming. It's coming pretty soon, but this is your introduction to the game. Hopefully, we will see more there. I think
More
that's sort of
TLOU.
more TLOU, yeah. TLOU to the max. Next question. This one from Nolasco. My dudes. This one is for John, I imagine. So, John, my dude, in this hard times of hard copies of certain games, is there any way to know if you are buying a hard copy of a game with no game in it beforehand? I don't want to get a horrible surprise as when I got Halo Infinite. Thank you for your hard work. So yeah, let's explain the situation here, which is to say that games are being released on consoles, most specifically on Xbox Series machines, right, that don't actually have any Xbox Series code on them.
Well, Halo's actually a little different than that because it has no code on it. Right?
None at all.
None. There's no game there. You cannot play Halo Infinite from that disc.
So
that's actually the issue.
Nothing
right?
installs, right?
It installs some data, but if you try to run it, it says it needs to connect to the internet to finish downloading it. Even on a regular Xbox One. That was the issue, right? Like, it's true with a lot of Xbox games right now that use smart delivery. They often put the Xbox One version on the disc, and to actually play the series version, you do have to download the data, which is unfortunate, but still technically the game is on there. But with situations like Halo, and I think Forza Horizon 5 as well, there is no game there. It's just some of the data, which is a bummer. Unfortunately, in those cases, there's really no way to know for sure just from the packaging. It's something you kind of have to wait for people to find out the hard way. But in other cases, so this is actually not that uncommon on Switch. I mean, it's not that common, I guess, but it does happen on Switch. The difference there is that all of the games where it's only a partial game, sometimes they have a cartridge with only some of the data, sometimes it's just a code in a box, but either way, Nintendo requires them to put a large banner on the packaging to say requires an internet connection to download the game. So you know from the packaging that it for sure requires an extra download. So Nintendo has at least covered that, so that's good. On PlayStation, it's less rare on the times when it happens. It's usually is on the box, but it's because it's a third-party release, I think, where they do specify that, and it would have also been specified on the Xbox version. But I don't think they've put out any first-party games that I know of where the game itself isn't on the disc at all. That's a very new thing in this world. So yeah. I think that's the key, though. All Microsoft has to do, if they're going to continue to do that, and I wish they would reconsider or release a version that doesn't have that limitation, just needs to put a label on the box to make it very clear that what is in here is not playable without downloading something.
Alaska's question. There's no way to know.
Right now, there's really no way to know.
It's a bit of a lottery, but generally you're fine on PlayStation. I think that it's basically smart delivery that's the issue for Microsoft, right? Where they have to accommodate Xbox One and Series.
The key there is I actually think once smart delivery goes away, and by that I mean cross-gen goes away, this problem should hopefully solve itself, right? For the most part. And we'll get the games that are just the Series X games on the disc each time, because there's no reason to put Xbox One code on there, and there's no reason to put Xbox Series S code on there either, because it has no disk drive. So it would only be Series X on the disc. So essentially we're waiting for the death of smart delivery and cross-gen. Once that happens, then the games should be complete on disc, and that's great. I can't wait for that.
And certainly, I think we've stated this many times in the past, but in the case of titles like Forza Horizon 5 and Halo Infinite, some sort of definitive edition with all the DLCs and everything on there, even if it was a limited release, physical would be the way forward there.
There is one thing to note on the PlayStation side that people should be aware of. Some of the games have had the option to buy a PS4 version and then get the PlayStation 5 version, and they do sometimes charge an upgrade fee, which is just silly, I think. But like Horizon was like this, and people were like, "Oh, I'll save money and buy the PS4 version." But the thing to keep in mind there is That disc, of course, being the PS4 version, only contains the PS4 version. So the PS5 version then is relegated to a digital download through your account. So when getting into that sort of upgrade situation, I think it's best to look at which physical disc has the actual version that you want. If you care about those things. Not everybody does, so, you know.
Let's move on to the next question. This one's from Tom Fasnage. Another one regarding a potential Super Switch, which has to be the name, surely. How possible do we reckon it would be to have a dock that uses a high bandwidth interface like PCI Express and actually houses a high wattage GPU, 50 to 100 watts, with sufficient cooling? I know Nintendo probably doesn't want to overly diverge and segment the game development process for docked/portable games, but this seems entirely possible to me and would be attractive to quite a broad market, delivering on the promise Switch has as a hybrid machine. What are the obstacles for this? Interconnect, form factor, over segmentation of games? Question mark, Alex? Yes.
The biggest obstacle to this is Nintendo just being really cheap. Why would they spend all this money doing something that is optional, like all the time? I don't think that's the way they roll. I think they really want an SoC, and just one SoC, and that's it. And I don't think they would, contract NVIDIA to, have a great interconnect there and just have another expensive GPU. I just don't think it's their MO. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think this is it's very doable. We see external PCIe all the time on PC these days. I've never really used it. I think Rich has though before. And it's actually a thing that does exist. And it works well enough, assuming there's enough lanes and the GPU is good enough for it. I just don't think it's a thing that Nintendo would ever do. It's just not what they do.
And I think that's fair, though, because the cost side of things is extreme. If you're worrying about your whole SoC and board inside the Switch, but then you're also doing a second GPU within the dock, the cost of that is not insignificant, right? So and the only way to make it work is if it were included with every Switch. It couldn't just be an add-on. And I think that would just bump the price up too high, and there's no way it would be feasible to them.
Yeah, I don't think they're doing that.
I mean, if this crazy scheme was to come to pass, it would have to be an add-on, because you're basically doubling the cost of your most expensive component.
But if it was an add-on, nobody wouldn't do well. It would just
expansion pack style, right?
Yeah, it would either be expansion pack or like the Frankenstick on the 3DS, where it just people forget about it and it goes away, and it's a bad idea.
The Frankenstick.
Or
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah. Or what about the 3DS? 3DS had the new 3DS, right? Significantly more powerful. Barely any games shipped for it, right? Yeah. I have them all, actually. There's only like 3 or 4, if I recall, that actually used it. If you have homebrew, you can actually overclock it for all software, which is cool. But there's this precedent of Nintendo including more powerful hardware in a revision, and then because it's optional, it barely gets used. And I think that's what would happen here.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is, if you're going to be going to all of the expense to create a dock with a much more capable GPU, it would actually make more sense simply just to make it a home console, which has got compatibility with the mobile machine, but it just does everything at higher resolutions and with better graphics. In effect, this kind of segmentation that you see with Series X and Series S, the difference being that your Series S equivalent is the handheld device. So that would be the way forward, really, because it would actually gain traction as a home console rather than an optional add-on. But it kind of negates the Switch concept, which is to say that you can use it as a hybrid device. And if the rumors are to be believed, and essentially the solution to the home console conundrum is DLSS, that's probably a more elegant solution. And it also introduces silicon within the SoC that could be used for other things other than upscaling. So yeah, it's an interesting idea, but it's kind of fraught with difficulties, limited commercial viability, not particularly mainstream as a proposition. So yeah, sort of.
Well, what if they just made it so you could take that GPU with you? Like it becomes like a giant belt buckle, or like you have a strap on your shoulder, you just carry your GPU with you.
Or what are they, like these VR backpacks?
Exactly.
They can attach it to like a glove, right?
I'm sure
Like,
that would be
like
a
right
mass
there.
market success.
Fashion statement.
Yeah, I think that answers that one. Interesting, but kind of unviable, really. But I really am looking forward to seeing what they've got lined up for us for the next Switch. Let's move on to the next question. This one from The Collector. Are we on the cusp of a new generation of GPUs? Oh, as we are on the cusp of a new generation of GPUs, at least according to the leaks, what are your most wanted new techs that you feel would significantly change the gaming experience, Alex? We've kind of had the new techs, right?
We've got them since 2018, and I'm very grateful. Well, at least, DLSS 2.0.
A lot of the features have barely been touched, though, really. That's kind of, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, it would be nice to see. I think it would be great to see more games shipping with mesh shaders and exploring that new avenue. Kind of like how Nanite is a breakthrough of its own right. I think there are some interesting mesh shader paths that probably it'd be great to see them in games. But other than that, I actually think something that we've talked about tangentially regarding GPUs for a while now is the equivalent of frame rate interpolation via machine learning of some sort, some way to in a GPU limited scenario without referencing anything that the GPU is doing really, so you're decoupled from it, have the ability to scale up to like 240, 480, whatever hertz, and have it look reasonable. I think that'd be great. It'd be fun to, run a game at 60 FPS minimum or something like that, and then have it look a lot closer to 120. I think that'd be a cool tech. It is surprising that it doesn't exist yet. DLSS is kind of doing that, but it's still CPU limited. What I'm proposing is something that is just like, it's all on your GPU. That is something I would like.
So you suggesting that the CPU is still running at full tick, or would that be interpolating?
It would, yeah, the CPU would just be running there at the normal 60, and with motion vectors in between frames, the GPU would be generating half steps and quarter steps and things like that. That's how I imagine this scenario. Because otherwise, you're just CPU limited, and most games are CPU limited when you get up to like 100 anyway, so it would be so wasteful. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, that's an interesting point, because obviously we've got RTX 4000 series coming, and we do want to see a substantial leap forward there, not just on the hardware side, but also on the software side. And obviously, with each new generation, it's all about upticks in performance, and I suspect we're going to get a big uptick in performance. But we also want to see improved ray tracing. We want to see more from DLSS. John, is there anything you want to see?
Oh, absolutely. The big thing I want to see is I want them to move. I want a quad slot GPU that's got more HDMI. It's got more DisplayPort. It's got analog VGA out, and it's got BNC connectors all on there. Take full advantage of it. Go all the way. That's my dream right there.
BNC connectors.
Why not?
Yeah. Why not,
dude?
Like, just go all the way. Or it'd be like what they use for SDI and everything. Like,
bring back the USB 3. That's what I want to see. Bring it back.
I want all the connections. In all seriousness, I would love to see an analog video output return to a modern GPU.
It'd be so glorious. Yeah.
It'll never happen, but darn it.
There's nothing preventing the aftermarket or the PC, the board partners from doing that, though, because they have they control that stuff.
Exactly.
It's so weird that they don't do it.
This deluxe board that has way more outputs and analog outputs as well, and just get like the extreme gamer, whatever they want to call it. Put some crazy character on the box and make it extreme.
Okay. Not an evil. Well, actually, the evil commando could stage a dramatic return.
Yeah, they could bring the evil commando back.
Evil Commando Creator Edition.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to our final question. This one from Catherine McKenzie. Pop-in and long loading times will likely be remembered as particularly profound weaknesses in last generation hardware. What sort of weaknesses or shortcomings do you think this generation will be remembered for in the annals of history? Artifacts from temporal effects / reconstruction, or something less foreseeable? What's the absolute longest amount of time I can wait before upgrading from my 4690K? Wow, that's almost another question in itself, but we shall
Yeah.
tackle it. Alex,
Sure.
what
I
sort of
think
weaknesses?
I think it's the obvious one. It's the ray
Ray
tracing
tracing?
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
you-
just like we knew RDNA 2 was not going to be as good at it, and then these are like smaller versions of RDNA 2. So I think that's it. Like, other than the really the titles where they have a lot of time to spend and make sure that the optimizations are not so visible via art and all these other things. Most other titles that have RT, it's going to be obvious that that's like the place where they had to scramble and make things cheaper.
Actually, it's basically at the moment, whether this will remain the case as the Lumen and Nanite era looms, you can either have 60 FPS or 30 FPS with ray tracing. I mean, there are outliers to that, obviously, the Insomniac games, for example. But that's the lie of the land at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's not so surprising. In the end, it would have been cool if they launched with different, like if AMD had different hardware lined up there. That would have been cool. I don't even know if RDNA 3 is going to actually change that. I haven't heard much. I mean, the rumors are one thing, but I don't.
It's already in the PS5 though. RDNA 3.
This is very true. I'm
forgot about that.
It's in there, so maybe yeah. I think that's going to be it, and that does suck a little bit sometimes because I think like, oh man, just imagine if it had an NVIDIA chip, like what we would be getting now. Just imagine DLSS on console. Like, oh boy, that would have been cool. But I think that's about it. Other than that, I'm actually pretty happy with this gen of hardware. I'm just curious to see how long developers are going to be targeting 60 versus when they start saying, okay, it's 30 time. That's what I'm wondering.
It's the specter of Unreal Engine 5, really, isn't it? If they're going to be using Lumen and Nanite, and because the CPU, well, that's the kind of remarkable thing, right? The CPU load there is quite astonishing, and we kind of went into this generation thinking that the CPU question had been solved. It hasn't really, based on Unreal Engine 5. John, what do you think is going to be the profound weaknesses that will be the legacy of this generation?
It's less about the visuals and rendering side and more I'm just thinking about long-term accessibility of the content. I think with the way things are now, the subscription services, incomplete games launching, not that that's not been an issue before, it does make you wonder about accessing this stuff down the road. I assume most people know what they're getting into, but I have to wonder, like, imagine you went and you buy like a brand new PS5 or Xbox and you only use the subscription service for the entirety of the console. You're paying this money over the years, you spend all that money on the console, and then years later you look back and you realize you don't actually own any games and they're all like no longer accessible unless you subscribe, and even then they might be gone at that point. And of course purchasing is still an option and a big deal, but I do have to wonder about that. It is kind of weird to think that somebody could go a whole generation and they've invested all that time and money into these things, and then they actually have nothing to show for it except for the box at the end.
Right. So, well, it's kind of going that way with movies and CDs, isn't it?
Sadly, yeah. So
I was going to basically ask Alex to tackle the second question, the absolute longest amount of time I can wait before upgrading from my 4690K.
I would say take a look at when Zen 4 later stuff launches, like that's the latter half of this year. Look at the benchmarks and weigh the cost performance between Intel and AMD there, and then upgrade, because they're already like the newest Intel, the 5000 series Ryzen is already like really great. They're so good. And these are only going to be better. And they're already, I would say, in some areas, profoundly faster than what the consoles have. So you would be like set for an entire generation if you did that, by far, much like you were with your 4690K for the most part. So that's the way I'd say it. Just wait till the Zen 4 release and compare what matches your preferences at that point.
Interesting point, because I don't think I could play PC games with a 4690K
Yeah.
at the moment.
Right now, you'd be 30 FPS for
It'd be
so
30
many
FPS,
games.
yeah, for a lot of games. And the main issue there, I mean, even if you upgraded to like 4790K, which doubles your thread count, that would actually extend that system life, if by quite a margin. The main issue at the moment is that games are simply not designed for 4 threads anymore, which is what the 4690K has, which means that it doesn't matter how much you overclock it, you're going to be facing some profound limitations there. So I think, if you want to have a short-term performance boost, something along the lines of the 4790K would actually offer a dramatic improvement. But in the here and now, I think the best bang for the buck from my perspective would be like probably the 12700K from Intel. But you're right, Alex, with Zen 4 just around the corner, there's going to be a lot of competition in that space. And yes, it would be a fantastic time to upgrade, I think.
Yeah, I think that Rich is right, though. Like that, those new Alder Lake, I think the mid and low range Alder Lake are really competitive and really great. So maybe if you don't feel like waiting, that's also an upgrade path for sure. But it'd be expensive, because you got the board. You probably need a new power supply, by the way, Catherine. And that would be probably another investment. Then you got the RAM, which is also kind of expensive. So let's just maybe wait a bit. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's it. That's the end. That's the last question. And that's the end of this show. So if you enjoyed it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications. No guarantees there. That is my disclaimer. And DF supporter program. Get involved. Join our amazing community. Get access to a big bunch of bonus material. Phenomenal retro content. And yes, that's it. That is indeed the end. See you next week. Bye-bye. Nintendo emerged from hiding with a new DF. Do that again.
DF Direct.
DF Direct.
DF Direct.